Welcome back. This is the third video in the Anomaly Drones Dragon video series. The second build video, but the third overall video. And in this video we'll be finishing the build. We'll be installing the camera and the flight controller, video transmitter and receiver, propellers, canopy, all that stuff, including the battery. I'm hoping I'll do one more video after this one, which will be 4 total videos, and that last one will be a flight video. The first thing we're going to do in this video is install the flight controller. I've done all the wiring I can do up to that point. We have our motor wires, we have our power connector for the video transmitter, all the ESC power wires are there, and the ESCs are in place. So now it's time to start tucking these wires in place here. We'll get the flight controller mounted up on top there, like that, so that the little front marker is facing front. And we'll do all the signal wires for the ESCs next. 2 of them will go on the underside of the flight controller, and 2 of them will come to the top of the flight controller. Okay, I'm going to do something that I'm hoping will be clever here, but I'm not exactly sure yet. If you look at this flight controller, PWM 2 and 4 are on the bottom side of the flight controller. So I've mounted it upside down, and I'm going to take motors number 2 and 4, which are the front right and rear left, and I'm going to solder those wires to the flight controller first so that I can tilt it over into place and the wires will bundle neatly underneath the flight controller, and I think there will be enough room under there to do that. Okay, so I've got the signal wires from the ESCs numbers 2 and 4 attached to PWM 2 and 4 on the bottom of the flight controller, and things are getting a little bit crowded here for sure, but when I flip this flight controller over so it's right side up, things will look quite a bit cleaner because a lot of this wiring will be underneath. But I also attached my buzzer wires here, and I left them loose for now because I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with the buzzer, so I just wanted to have some wire to mess with. Cut to length and solder the buzzer on when I'm ready for that. And I also took care of the power wires here that go to the flight controller. Embarrassingly, I had actually forgotten about those entirely, so I just went ahead and took care of those, and again they come up to the bottom side of the flight controller, so when I flip it over they all nest in there nicely. Okay, making progress. So I flipped the flight controller over so now it's right side up, and here are the connections that are remaining. I have my PWM1 from motor 1, I have PWM3 from motor 3, and those both attached to the top of the flight controller here. I've got my ProSight connector for the video transmitter, and I've got my buzzer wires here, and then I've got my receiver wires right here. And the receiver wires are a carryover from my other machine, so they were here when I started. I'm going to solder the ESC wires, the signal wires, to the top of the flight controller next. Right here. Now we've got all the soldering connections done with the exception of the buzzer. But the next thing I'm going to do is spin this plate back around so the shelf is in the back, because I'm going to see if I can mount the receiver and maybe the buzzer on there and see what that looks like. I am going to tighten these down just slightly for now because this is the mechanism that retains the ESCs, so I just want to keep them from sliding around. So now you can see the shelf extends over the back part there. And I'm hoping I can put the receiver in there, or I might just do what the Anomaly Drones folks recommended and just attach it to the underside of the canopy. And it also just occurred to me that all I need to do to test this for the first time with all the ESCs hooked up and the motors and the flight controller is plug in the receiver and a battery. So that's what I've done. I've plugged in the receiver here. I'm going to turn on my Tyrannus.
Welcome to Tyrannus.
And I'm going to plug in a battery with a light bulb. If you guys have ever seen this before, it's basically a light bulb in series with a pair of battery connectors, or a battery connector and a receptacle. And this will limit the amount of current going to the system if there's a short, because it'll just light the light bulb. So what I'm going to do is plug my light bulb in, and this is the first time I'm powering this system up. If I've shorted something in the wiring, I want to make sure that nothing's going to blow up. So as I plug this in, if the light bulb goes on, I know I have a problem. So here goes. I don't see any light in the light bulb. So let's unplug that, and unplug this, and plug the battery in. Okay, that's good. We got good sounds. So let's just check. Alright, we've got receiver, flight controller, lights on. Let's see if we get some action from the motors. Yes, the motors are running. Let's make sure we got the directions going the right way. Yep. 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 Okay, everything's turning in the right direction. The motors are running. Going to idle up, and yep, our flight controller's doing what it's supposed to do, correcting for movement. So I think we're good. Well, here's what I decided to do with the receiver. I really wanted to mount it to the shelf here, but I kept thinking about the antennas. How would I make sure the antennas stay as high as possible in the canopy and maintain the 90-degree separation? So I decided to mount it to the canopy, even though the thing I don't like about that is that when I take the canopy off, I've got the wire going to the canopy. I don't want to make this wire longer. I could, but the longer the wire, the more chance it could pick up noise and cause a problem. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to get the canopy on and off. I'll have to fiddle with the connector when I do that. But it's not that big of a deal. Once this thing is up and running, unless I crash it, I really shouldn't have to be taking the canopy off a lot to worry about that. So that's what I'm going to do with the receiver. The next thing I want to think about is the ProSight antennas. And these guys have really long wires, as anyone who's worked with the ProSight knows. And we've got these nice little 3D printed flexible mounts for them, which is great. And they slot right in here into these little cutouts in the chassis, which is very nice, very clean installation. And these guys will fit in here and then snake up to the top of the video transmitter. Oh, you may have noticed that I snuck the video transmitter on there while no one was looking. I put it on there so that I could see an overview of kind of where everything was going to fit and see if maybe I could even put the receiver on top of that. But I decided that I'm probably going to end up with some antenna wiring up here, so I didn't want to crowd the top of that. Also, I'm going to put a piece of foam on the inside of the canopy, which is a recommendation from the Anomaly Drones folks, to press down on the top of this transmitter a little bit and keep the cables from moving around during flight, and it keeps these connectors from vibrating during flight, which can increase the video quality and or prevent problems that some people have noticed with the ProSight system, where under full throttle the vibration is high and it causes a little bit of video interference. So we'll be putting some soft egg crate foam up in here, and it'll press down on top there when the canopy is in place. So that turned out not to be a great place for the receiver. Okay, we've made some good progress here. I've installed the antennas. As you can see, I just ran the wires down such that they'll fit through the little slots that are provided in the canopy. I thought I might have to open this up a little bit, but it turned out the wires sort of naturally fell into place there. And I just looped them underneath the motor wires and then back up to the video transmitter. And then they get coiled up on top of the transmitter, and again, keeping those coils as large as you possibly can. You really don't want to have any super tight bend radiuses on those types of cables. And they're not super tightly zip tied up here, just enough to hold them in place. You don't want to cinch them down too much and then end up damaging the coax wire. So they still have the tiniest little bit of freedom to move around. But we will be putting a piece of foam on the inside of the canopy like we talked about earlier, which will push down on those lightly just to keep them from moving around under vibration. I also put the little piece of heat shrink around the power wire for the video transmitter, like I said I would do earlier, and that should just help it, prevent the chafing from going on against that edge of carbon there, which may or may not really be a problem. I ended up not even using this shelf really for anything, so it wouldn't matter if I were to just cut it off, then I would be able to have easier access to the flight controller, but it's not something you really have to access that often, so I'm just going to leave the shelf there rather than cut it off. Who knows, maybe I'll change my mind in the future and decide to mount my receiver there or something. Alright, we have the camera installed, and much to my delight, I found that the upper of the two positions, now if I zoom out and you look at this camera mount, it's got two sort of circles there. The lower circle is a very small angle, probably 10 degrees, and the upper circle is a higher angle. And it turns out I was shooting for 30 degrees, and that's exactly what it ended up being. I have a little gauge here that I use. It might be hard to tell on camera because the motor kind of gets in the way. It's about 30 degrees. Maybe 28 or something like that. It's pretty close to what I wanted, so that should work just fine for me. Now, the camera cable is something to be paid a little bit of attention to. The cable has a lot of wires, and you want to make sure that those wires are routed in a way that they're not going to get damaged. And in this case, they sort of just coil naturally around in a little circle, terminating at the video transmitter here. And what I did is used a little piece of double-sided adhesive tape on the top there to help retain that connector. That connector, if it starts to pull out of the video transmitter on the ProSight system, can cause some strange things to happen. You could just use a piece of electrical tape, but I have this really gooey style adhesive tape, double-sided tape. It's like this sort of gel, clear gel style tape, and the stuff is just super gooey. So I decided to use that because it seems to retain things like that well. And I just put a little piece kind of right there where the connector is. And the connector doesn't have much of a flat spot on there to adhere to, but it's better than nothing. In doing this on my Alien, I found that it seemed to work just fine. So that's why I used that little piece of tape there. And then the wires just sort of coil around and down to the back side of the camera there. And if you look at the battery compartment, that's what we're going to deal with next. So the camera wires are exposed there, as you can see. But it turns out that if you put a battery in here and you look at the way it can go, if it slams up against the front in a crash, it turns out it still doesn't crush the camera wires. It may touch them, but it's not going to damage them as far as I can tell. So I'm not too worried about it. And I just quickly threw this on a flat surface, or an edge, so that I could check the CG, and it actually looks like the battery is going to need to be a little bit rearward, not necessarily right at the very front of the machine. And the kit is supplied with some of this Velcro, which is sort of the newer style Velcro. It's the same on both sides, and it sort of locks together better than a standard Velcro. It almost kind of snaps together. In fact, I'm kind of worried that I won't be able to get the battery out once I have it in, but you know, the Anomaly Drones folks have been using it this way, and they say that it's good enough to retain the battery even in a crash. The battery's not going to fly out. I guess I'm going to try it, although I am a little bit skeptical. As you can see, there are some slots down here. Can you see there's a slot there? You could actually run a battery strap through there. There's clearance underneath the video transmitter, and so you can run a strap through there and underneath the battery. The problem is when you add the thickness of the Velcro, and if we just take this real quick, we put this Velcro here like this, drop that in the hole, like that. There'd be a big piece on the bottom and a smaller piece on the battery, and then we put the battery in place. You can see that the battery kind of, it doesn't exactly fit completely inside that cavity. That would be nice, right? It would be slick if it fit inside, but we don't really need to have the battery completely flush in there. And if we've got our little feet in here, which I haven't glued in yet, and we put this thing on the surface of the bench, keep the connector out of the way, it actually does sit on the feet, even though the battery's sticking out. And it's hard to tell from here. You might be able to tell. If we line up those 2 feet, you can see that there's actually still just a slightest bit of room there that a strap could be running underneath this battery, and it would still have the ground clearance. And Anomaly Drones also shipped this sort of lower profile strap. It doesn't have the big buckle that the typical straps have, and so I might be able to try this strap underneath the battery just as some additional insurance that the battery's not going to fly out in a crash and disconnect the XT60 and leave me without a buzzer and a way to find the model. So that's why I like to use a strap, and I've found that the battery strap does fit. It does make the battery a little bit tight on the sides. I put this battery in here. You can see it's pretty snug, and you can hear it click in with that Velcro. And then I can strap this if I want. This strap is okay. It's not as nice as the ones with the buckle because it's harder to tighten it. And it doesn't end up being as tight as the style with the buckle. But it is a lower profile, and I believe that it will retain the battery sufficiently. And the balance cord and some of the battery wire can be stuffed in this little compartment back here, and then the connector mated. It works out pretty nicely. Now I added a little piece of tape here to the front of the battery because that Velcro, not the strap, but the Velcro at the bottom, holds pretty tight. And so I added this strap of packing tape that would allow me to yank on that battery, get it out. It makes it a lot easier to pull it out. It's just a piece of tape that I wrapped around the bottom here, up to the side, folded it over on itself and trimmed it. It just makes it a little tab that you can pull on. And for the feet, I'm going to use the glue that Anomaly Drones guys recommended, which is this right here. Loctite Plastics Bonding System fuses hard to bond plastics. It's a two-part system with an activator and a bonder. And it's designed to adhere to plastics that are kind of slippery. Well, I used that adhesive and I bonded the feet in. It was super easy. It's just a two-part adhesive where first you prime the surfaces and then you use the glue and you put them on. But the only other thing I can think of that I need to do is put some Loctite on these screws that retain these standoffs. There is a metal standoff at each corner here, and so it's probably a good thing to put some Loctite on there to make sure that those don't come loose. Now the screws at the top of the standoffs are going through this rubbery plastic, and usually something with a little bit of a give to it, an elastomer like that, will retain the screw like a lock washer does. So probably don't need to use Loctite on the top screws. Okay, I think I'm pretty much ready to go now. I have all four fasteners holding in my video transmitter. I had loosened it to put in the Velcro strap. I've got the Velcro and the Velcro strap in place. I've Loctited my screws here. I've got my camera in place and I've secured the wires. I added the third screw to the back of the battery connector fairing. There's a little lock nut in the back there for that guy. I've made sure that all the screws for the flight controller are tightened, these four here. I've got my antenna screws in place. Those are little plastic nuts, metal screws with plastic nuts that are supplied with the kit. And I've got my feet glued in, and I've got my wires temporarily taped in. I may glue those once I make sure that everything flies the way it should and it flies reliably and I don't blow out any motors or speed controls in the first 5 minutes of flight. And so at this point, we're pretty much done. The only other thing I want to do is put my little piece of foam on the top that I discussed that will be used to sort of make sure these connectors and wires don't bounce around during flight. They're pretty secure already. I mean, they're not super tight. You don't want them to be tight, but you can see there's a little bit of movement here. The cable ties pretty much hold the wires in place, but they can slide around just a little bit so that they don't get, bound up or damaged from being too restricted. And then that little piece of foam on the top will just kind of hold them. And this is just egg crate foam. That's all that is. I just cut a piece of egg crate foam. And I will admit, the canopy is going to be a little bit finicky because I've got my connector here that I have to deal with. So I have to connect this little connector to the receiver, which is a little bit not super easy to get to. It's not a nightmare, but there we go. I got that installed. Then I should be able to flip the canopy over, put on my little piece of foam, just sit there like that, and rest the canopy down over all the wires. There's going to be some tension due to that foam, and I want to make sure I don't pinch any of the wires as I put this canopy down into place. It looks like I'm pretty good. Right, one of the screws. And install that in the back. And we are ready to fly. Put the battery in. It is kind of nice the way it pops in there with that particular Velcro material. It does feel secure. There is one thing I want to mention here which I'm not in love with. See the camera? Now if you were running a lower camera angle, you wouldn't have a problem, but my camera is at 30 degrees and it's sticking right out. And there have been plenty of crashes where I land, you know, kind of like this. And that camera can move, which is good. If it gets hit hard, it'll push down. It's not that solidly mounted. You know, it's not going to move, but if you crash, it'll move. But I still think it's prone to damage. I wonder if they could create a canopy design that has a little bit of a ridge here, something that would kind of stick up and protect the camera. It wouldn't look as slick though. I also just heard that they're working on a canopy that will have provisions for a GoPro Hero 5 session, which would be nice. If you don't like to record directly from your ProSight and you like to use a GoPro, that'll be coming. But how could we forget the one thing that we definitely need to be able to get this machine into the air? Some propellers. I like the HQ props. These are the 543s. Wouldn't it be nice if I had some nice white ones like they had in the pictures on the site? I don't have any white ones, but I think the orange ones look pretty good too. Now we're talking. Did I get them all on there the right way? I believe I did. So this concludes the second build video. The machine is done and ready to fly, so in the next video we'll actually do just that. We'll take to the skies. Maybe I can try to get some footage of it actually flying as opposed to just footage from the ProSight, which would look the same on any machine. But I can't wait to fly this machine and see what the flight characteristics are like with the battery sitting right there at the CG. It's low and sleek. It should be very aerodynamic, so it should be very fast. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.